All right, good afternoon, everyone, again. So this is the last session on GDP, national income, GNI, etc. There's mostly theory in this, not too much calculations at all, really. So we're just going to talk a little bit. I'm going to look at a few figures. We're going to look at a few misconceptions about GDP, and then we'll look at how useful a lot of these things are to the government for them to make decisions on them. Okay, so the first thing we need to look at is, why do we calculate GDP? Why do we calculate GNP? Why do we calculate GNI? Like, what's the purpose of them? Yes, there's a purpose in just to calculate them for their own sakes. But what happens when we do calculate them? Well, essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, I suppose it depends which way you want to look at this. You're looking at this for purely economic reasons, or you're looking at this for social reasons, for sustainability reasons. So, some of the stuff we've talked about in the first couple of chapters. Number one, it tells us kind of where we are, where we are ranked, in the top countries of the world. Generally, what we're looking at is, what is our standard of living. If we're in the top 10, that's good. If we're in the bottom 10, that's bad. So where are we worldwide? What is our standard of living? And it does kind of in some ways tell that, though obviously there's discrepancies involved with it. It allows us to compare ourselves with other countries. So I think we looked at this again in the first chapter, and we said, oh, Norway's kind of on top when it comes to, the happiness index, this thing called the Human Development Index, whereas at the bottom you might have the Democratic Republic of Congo. But we want to know, really, because we're in Europe, we want to know, where in Europe are we? Are we one of the better countries, one of the more successful countries, one of the countries with better standard of living, etc.? They help the government to figure out what to do. So do they need to intervene in the economy? Do they need to look at the unemployment rate, the inflation rate? If GDP drops, why does it drop? Is there something the government can do for that? And we'll look at government intervention in another chapter next year, I think. Economic policy, again, same sort of stuff as well. We are part of the European Union, you know that, but we actually have to give the European Union money for it to work. So no more than I pay tax to pay myself, the Irish government have to pay tax, not a tax as such, but they have to transfer money to the European Union for them to create their budget, and then we might get some of that back in grants or whatever the case may be. That is determined by our GDP figure. So it is a percentage of our GDP. So if our GDP is quite small, we pay a proportion of that to the European Union budget. Because our GDP figure has been doing so well in the last 10 years, we're paying quite a lot of money to the European Union budget, something along the regions of like 8 to 10 billion per year. We actually pay the European Union. Now we get it back, but that's what we do. And then where are we? Click, click, click. Next thing we do, and this isn't perfect. It shows the distribution of income throughout the country. So you can break it down. You can look at the GDP figures, or the GDP per capita in Dublin and the Midlands and the West and the South and the North, and we can see which countries are suffering from, or which counties are more have suffer from more inequality. So again, you're going to get pretty much the border counties, the Donegal's, the Monaghans, etc., which a lot of people in Ireland would assume that they're the ones that are kind of the forgotten counties, which is in some way true. I just want to go back to this a little bit for a second. Hold on a second now. And I want to look at the CSO again. So some of you next year are going to be doing your project on this, and it's really important that you know where to go for all this information, for all economic data. It's all here, centralstatisticsoffice.ie. So here you've consumer price index, which is inflation, unemployment rate, and the real GDP figure. So you click into that, and GDP is calculated on a per quarter basis. And we can see down here, quarter 3, 2020, quarter 4 hasn't been done yet. Our GDP is roughly 93 billion, by the way, that's in millions. So 93 billion, 93,000 million for one quarter. So you multiply that by 4 and you'll get a rough idea of what our GDP is. It's about 380 billion. 380 billion is our GDP figure. Our GNP figure is a little bit lower. Again, we've spoken about that because that's where international companies send their profits outside of the country. Another thing, and we don't really rate it as GDP. When we look at this, we don't really rate it as GDP. We rate it as GDP per capita, per person. How much do we have? I've shown you this before. This is a tool called Gapminder, gapminder.org. I put this up already. But again, GDP is really useful because GDP per capita is really useful to compare, and we'll talk about this in a second, to compare different countries to see how they are, because we want to see ourselves in the chart. Where are we? Are we one of the top countries, or are we one of the bottom countries? So GDP per capita says, however wealthy your country is, you divide that by your population, That's per capita per person, and that'll give you your figure. And as you can see here, Ireland pretty much since in the last 30 or 40 years has pretty much shot up. It's one of the world leaders now in GDP per capita. In fact, I think we're coming in the top 5. So this is right now 2020. Luxembourg is the richest country in the world per capita based on GDP. Ireland's top 5. United States is in the top 10. Again, the United States, why is it? Because there's so many bloody billionaires in the United States. China, you can see China really from mid-1990s has just shot up. The problem with China, of course, is not the problem, but it's got a massive population. So again, 1.6 billion people divided by their GDP. Their GDP per capita is half of what Ireland is. If a half, sorry, it's about a third of what Ireland is, just because of their population. Same in India. India's GDP is enormous, but again, you're 1.4 billion people in India. That's a problem. And then at the very bottom, Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. So you can see GDP per person there is like $800, which is again nothing, really, really, really low. Again, what does this measure? This is just measuring how much wealth is created in the country. It doesn't really tell us too much about happiness and standard of life and equality and all these other issues that we were kind of referred to the HDI index when we're looking at that. Okay, let's keep going. So the limitations. So again, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. It doesn't show the different. So the limitations are what does it not show? It doesn't show the problems of population. It doesn't show its inflation or deflation, welfare, the welfare state, unemployment, levels of taxation, social costs. So again, we talked about the HDI inequalities, etc. It doesn't show us how it's distributed properly throughout the country. It doesn't show us a lot of things. Okay, and that is the problem with these. Okay, it's very hard also to compare us to India and China. I mean, you look at us there, we're like, oh, hey, we're better than China and Brazil. No, we're not. Because again, there's so many different variables that you need to take into account. You can't compare us to India. You can't even compare us to the United States. So it's very hard to do this. Number one, because of foreign exchange. We're there in dollars. We're in euros. The UK are in pounds. So there's foreign exchange problems. There's market-oriented economies, which again looks at the type of economic system. So you can't really compare us to a free market system in America, nor can you compare us to the centrally planned system in China. It doesn't really work. It doesn't really compare us in the length of the working week. It depends where in the world you live. Sometimes people have to work 7 days a week. Sometimes people get 5 days holidays a year. It's very different. Nature of government spending, again, same thing, government intervention, and in different countries have different needs. I mean, you could do this in geography. We're going to do this later on as well. We're going to look at the disparity that exists throughout the whole world. And you cannot compare our GDP to Thailand's GDP and say, well, they're the same. And population-wise, we're the same. We're not the same at all. We have different needs, different requirements, different forms of government. Okay. I'm going to belch this. This is called a hidden economy. Now, this is something that is very difficult to measure, especially when we talk about GDP. This is also called the shadow economy, or it's also called the black economy. And really, this is the stuff that is not recorded. This is the stuff that's not recorded. This is the stuff that happens underneath the surface. Essentially, what does this mean? This is talking about crime, bribery, and the vast majority of which is neither crime nor bribery. It's the cash economy, paying people in cash. I saw this. When I was doing my research on this, I looked at this and I looked at the top countries, every country in the world, and said how much of their economy is hidden. How much of their economy, their GDP, is actually hidden, like is impossible to track. We have Zimbabwe at the top. So 67% of the Zimbabwean economy is done through cash or bribes or crime or whatever the case may be. The government doesn't know. The government can't track it. They can't track it because this is people who are refusing to pay tax, not paying VAT, or there's corruption or whatever the case may be. So Zimbabwe, Haiti, Georgia, Nigeria, Gabon, Burma. I suppose the one up there that you'd be looking at, the first European country, is Ukraine. So Ukraine, 70th there, 42%. Now, why might that be the case in Ukraine? Well, you can talk about Russian interference, you can talk about the mafia, you can talk about all these different things. But that's a massive thing. That means the government is not seeing nearly half of money that's being circulated throughout the economy. They can't pay tax. They can't get the tax from it. They can't invest in the country. We look at the bottom here, where we are there, 147th. That's still big. 10%, 9.58% of our economy is hidden. 9.58% of our economy is hidden, and that's just again mainly people paying tax or not paying tax, paying cash. Now, we are all responsible for this. We all do it. We're all part of this. Some of you are working and you're getting paid in cash. Why wouldn't you get paid in cash? But like, really, you should be registering. You should be paying your tax. You should be paying your PRSI. I do it as well. Do I not? Of course I do. If I give grinds to someone, do you think I register that? I shouldn't really be putting this on record, but no, I don't. Okay, I moved house there 9 months ago. I had a painter come in and he painted my whole house. I asked him one thing only. What's your cash price? Why did I ask him that? Because I didn't want to pay 20% VAT on top of his cost. So rather than it costing me €1,000 if I had to pay him with VAT, he charged me €800. Paid him €800 cash. He didn't declare it. I didn't ask. Put my hands up. Did I break the law? No, he broke the law technically. So this is what we're talking about, the hidden economy. The only surprising one there I saw was China, 12%. I would have assumed in China there'd be a huge amount of corruption and criminality, etc. But what we forget in China is, if you're a politician and you've been found guilty of corruption, well, they execute you. So different levels of persuasion to try and not get people to put cash through the system. So interesting. Hidden economy is there's a massive economic effect. So what's the problem with the hidden economy? Mainly the government doesn't get tax, and if the government can't get tax, what can it not do? It cannot spend on essential services, on the hospitals, on the schools, on the roads, on wages, etc. Okay, legitimate business activity, there's a threat to jobs. There is a threat to jobs because, again, you can have two competitors. One is playing by the books, playing by the proper rules, and the other is not. It's very hard for two companies to compete if you know that one of the companies is doing things illegal. Increased government expenditure on enforcement, that just means the revenue commissioners or the Gardaí might try and crack down on people not paying tax, but it costs a lot of money. That's the problem there. Pressure on government services, absolutely. Standards of products or services can differ as well. If you buy something in the black market, or if you buy something on the Galway market, for someone that's selling you something from the boot of a car, well, it's probably stolen, but there's also no way you can come back. There's no warranty on it. There's no receipt. You can't bring back an Xbox that you bought for 300 for £100 off some fella's boot and expect him to give you back your money. That's not going to happen. Social effects are massive. Okay, crime levels. So there is an increase in crime levels. Again, not all this is crime, but a lot of it is crime and corruption. Technically, I'd be careful here. Technically, me not charging someone VAT to give a grind, would you call it a crime? No, but it is an illegal activity. So again, we're talking about illegal activities here, and it kind of snowballs. So this is this vicious circle. If everyone starts doing it, everyone starts doing it. If this painter says I'll take cash, and this painter says no, everything has to go through the books, there's a pressure on that person then who's doing it legitimately to start taking things illegally, to start taking cash payments illegally. When all this comes out, the public are outraged. Oh my God, there's so much corruption in this country. Yeah, but we're all kind of responsible for it as well. Let's be fair. And then decreasing the provision of public goods and services. So again, people lose faith in public services, and because of the level of corruption, you just can't rely on these things anymore. What strategies could the government do to undertake this? So again, what could the government do to get people from the hidden economy into the legitimate economy? Well, number one they can do is, if people don't want to pay tax, just reduce the tax rate. So reduce the tax rate. So if I don't want to pay 40% tax on my income, which I would have to do in a grind, they could say, well, maybe you could reduce it to 20%. And that's a whole different argument, and that's a big problem, if reducing tax on additional income. But it's something they could do. Some countries do it. Indirect taxes is things like taxation on cigarettes, for instance, or tax on alcohol. So, for instance, a lot of people who smoke, a lot of my friends who smoke, they buy them illegally. They buy them again at the boot of a car, because they're like, I'm not paying 12, 13 euros for a pack of cigarettes. Okay. So what they could do is they could reduce the indirect taxation on that. Better enforcement by the revenue commissioners. Revenue commissioners are in charge of Ireland's tax. Educate the public. So yada yada yada. Public. You need to pay your tax. Simplify the tax system. Close all loopholes. Easier said than done. And encourage a culture of being ethical. So this is where everyone should be ethical. I need to check the time here. 13:55. I think this is the last one here. So the government, really what they want to do is, how do we stop people being corrupt? How do we stop people doing things illegally? Yeah, in some places they've done amnesty. So what they do in a lot of countries, like every 10 years, they say, look, we're going to start from scratch. Whatever you've done in the past, we're going to just we're just going to pretend it never happened. But from January the 1st, 2021, you need to do it legally. We're not going to look at past crimes. Okay. And that is, my friends, the end of that chapter. Okay. What was I going to say? Yeah, that's it. Leave some comments and I'll throw something up in assignments. And do you know what? I'll give you your weekend off. I don't think you need to do any work. Let's just leave it till Tuesday. Okay. Sinead, see you later.